Welcome again to Illuminated, a talk show that discusses solutions to real-world problems. I'm the state chair, Joseph Michael Carr, of the Independent Voters of Illinois Independent Precinct Organization, better known as IVI Ipo. I'm here tonight with our Public Relations Chair and co-host, Jim Garfield. I'm going to turn it over to Jim. Jim?
Thanks so much, Joe. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We hope we have a great conversation. Tonight's topic is actually going to be police accountability, which you may love what you hear, you may hate what you hear, but our goal tonight is to make sure that you're informed by what you hear. So stick around, listen to what we've got to go on. We're joined by a wonderful guest tonight who has been born and raised on the Chicago South Side, is currently Director of Community Organizing with the Inner City Muslim Action Network, a community organization that fosters health, wellness, and healing by organizing for social change, cultivating the arts, and operating a holistic health center. He's also a longtime labor and community organizer, has trained hundreds of leaders in the community to fight for dignity and respect in their workplaces, their neighborhoods, and for racial justice. He's also been part of SEIU Healthcare, the Action Now Institute, and is a spokesperson for the Grassroots Alliance for Police Accountability. Please welcome to our program, Desmon Yancy.
Thank you for having me.
Desmon, thank you so much. So I just want to jump right into it. A lot of folks, I'm guessing, will not have heard of the Inner City Muslim Action Network. What is that organization?
Sure. So Inner City Muslim Action Network was founded about 25 years ago. Started organizing returning residents from prison who were converted to Islam on the East Side, and did a lot of organizing initially around corner stores. As you know, corner stores are sort of the staple in many Black communities, but there are some difficulties with the way they show up in our communities. And so there was some initial organizing around that 20-some years ago, which eventually led to a food pantry and a number of other things. Most of our work right now has been centered around, of course, with COVID and the damage that it's done in our communities. We spend a significant amount of time doing work around food insecurity, eviction mitigation, making sure people stay in their homes, and we've been focusing on our police accountability work over the last few years as well.
Now, we mentioned that it runs a holistic health center. What all does that include? Does it include medical care, yoga? I don't know what holistic means in this case.
Sure. So our health center focuses on work around the health to highlight the health disparities that came out during the COVID pandemic. So high blood pressure, food insecurity, as I mentioned earlier, mental health. So there's like kind of the myriad of work there. And then through our arts and culture organizing, we try to touch on people's mental health in different ways, where we offer pottery classes, where we're able to sort of center in organizing and community space what it is that people want to manifest. Like often we talk about a vision statement. What would you change if you had a magic wand, or what would you do different in your community if you had the power? And sometimes that manifests itself in real organizing, but sometimes you got to take some baby steps and do some massaging of people. Our communities are been suffering for a while. You would say we have PTSD from all of what we've gone through, and there has to be some space to allow us to reclaim our dignity. And we try to do that as often as we can at IMAN.
So it does provide medical care, like
yes,
licensed
absolutely.
Physicians medical care, as well as mental health and just social interaction.
Sure. A bulk of our, this is a new organizing space for us, but it comes out of the spirit of Dolores Huerta, right? And the United Farm Workers, where health center organizing is sort of a space where our communities come together. Folks are a captive audience, right? They have an opportunity to stay there for a while. And while they're there dealing with their sort of internal or their medical health, it's a great opportunity to talk about what's contributed to that. Disinvestment in our communities, health deserts, food deserts, all these sorts of things that it just makes it harder to feel like you're living if you're dealing with these sorts of things on a constant basis.
Now, we mentioned that a lot of the work is organizing for social change. Is that organizing, is that social change primarily focused around the issues you just talked about?
Some of those issues. So I have 4 organizers on my staff who work in a number of different spaces. One, our health center organizer, who is based in our health center, talking to patients and bringing patients into the center, but also, again, talking about the greater need that exists in their lives. I have another organizer who works on food, our food ecosystem, which we are currently, or not currently, we're launching a food pantry in just a couple days on June 1st. In conjunction with the Greater Chicago Food Depository to provide food distribution on the corner of 63rd and Racine in the heart of Inglewood. Directly across from there, we're opening a fresh market later this summer, again, to solve this need of healthy food in our community. So there's sort of the pantry for folks who are in dire straits. And this isn't going to be a typical food pantry where this is people self-select. Not everybody likes arugula, right? But it gives them an opportunity to pick up the things that they do like. And then if they're able to, they can go across the street where we'll run a link match program where people can get additional value out of their state funds. And if they're able to purchase other fresh food, halal food, safe food for our communities, less sugary snacks, more fruits and vegetables, they can do that as well. And then a third organizer who is working on our police accountability work. He's focused mostly on helping to build out our ordinance, which is the Empowering Communities for Public Safety Ordinance, and also done some work on some other statewide legislative issues as well. So we try to touch on sort of the big kind of heart issues that exist in our communities, and just working to transform our communities that way.
It certainly sounds like there's a lot of diverse things you guys are working on at the same time, which is complicated, so kudos to that.
Thank you.
Now, we did mention that you are our spokesperson for the Grassroots Alliance for Police Accountability, and then one of IMAN's organizing practices is around police accountability. How much of your work focuses on that?
A good chunk of my work focuses on that, specifically because previously in previous roles, worked with other organizations, coordinating with GAPA around this work. This has been a mission for about the last 5 years for me. And most recently, as we've gotten closer to passage, I don't know if your viewers are familiar with this, but up to about 6 months ago, there were 2 competing ordinances moving through City Council. And through a number of different things, the 2 coalitions decided to come together to move one ordinance. And so there's a lot of lifting to bring 2 sort of massive coalitions that have been working for 10 plus years to bring this issue to bear. And with that, making sure that we're engaging a broad base of organizations. We've got about 150 faith, labor, and community organizations that have signed onto the ordinance, adding to that about 150 individuals. And we've got about 3/4 of the city council that also supports it. So our goal is to not just pass something transformative, but something that everyone's who's got some skin in the game has got some voice in it as well.
Now, to clarify, this is the Chicago City Council.
Yes.
Okay. Does your organization work outside of Chicago? Does it do Cook County as well? Does it try to do any kind of state legislative action, or is it mostly focused in the city?
So our organization is based here in Chicago. Excuse me. We've got a satellite office in Atlanta, which is doing sort of similar work with a smaller scale. Over the last 25 years, we've worked on statewide legislation and kind of most recently worked with a coalition across the state around the redistricting process, which is taking place now. We've helped to put together a map that is now being presented on the House side and are closing out our map that's going to be presented on the Senate side.
Now, in terms of the police accountability side of things, you said there's an ordinance that 2 different organizations are kind of pushing that have now kind of coalesced around a single ordinance.
Yes.
Was IMAN one of the 2 organizations that was really pushing?
Yeah, so a little background. The Grassroots Alliance for Police Accountability came together in summer of 2016 in response to the Police Accountability Task Force, which was chaired by then Lori Lightfoot, to talk about what a community commission would look like to provide oversight for the police department. IMAN was one of the founding organizations at that table. And then the other coalition was the Chicago Alliance for Racist and Repressed, CARPR is what we call it. Who was pushing an ordinance called CPAC, and which was Civilian Police Accountability Council. And what happened is last summer, George Floyd was murdered. a year ago tomorrow is when that happened. And the protest that came out of that really caused us to pause and realize that as organizations and coalitions with broad community support, broad automatic support, why are we in two separate spaces when it comes to police accountability? Our end game is the same, but what is it going to take for us to come together? So what we did is we spent some time having some really tough conversations over the last few months. The summer conversations, frankly, weren't as fruitful as we would have hoped. And then earlier this year, we revisited those conversations, largely because of what we felt was inaction by the mayor. And so the two coalitions came together and were able to pull together an ordinance that we think is the best of the two proposals that will provide real oversight and transformation for Chicago Police Department.
So I guess I'll ask, what does accountability look like as far as you are concerned, as far as the organization is concerned? What are you looking for? When you say accountability, what does that mean?
Well, let me start with what accountability looks like today. Right now, the Chicago Police Department is under a federal consent decree, which is a document that holds the city accountable for specific reforms related to the police department. Consent decrees aren't a tool that's to be taken lightly. And with the enormity of a consent decree, the Chicago Police Consent Decree is one of the largest in the last few years because of the sort of deep ongoing problems with the police department. When you look at the consent decree and then the existing accountability structures, COPA, the Civilian Office of Police Accountability, those have, and the police board have sort of failed the police, or failed the police and failed the community for that matter. Accountability today is, what we seek is something that is much more than that. If you look at the accountability structures that exist, none of those involve the community. And with the consent decree, the Chicago Police Department has missed, I believe, 7 of 10 deadlines, something 70% in the reforms that they want to make. And so you could either say that the police department is slow to make changes or loath to make changes. But at the end of the day, the sort of accountability that's needed is the kind that says that it's not okay for a 13-year-old to be murdered because a police officer was doing his job, right? There has to be much more involved in that. And we understand that there are Black and brown community residents who feel like they're under siege by the police department and that there should be much more accountability. I like to tell this story. About 10 years ago on the West Side, 3 generations of Chicagoans was with some senior citizens. I'm a Gen Xer, and then there were some millennials who had just gotten out of high school and walking by, all Black folks. And a police car drove by singing the theme song from the Monkees TV show. I don't know if folks remember that show. The show was from the 70s, but there's the racist connotation that exists when we talk about monkeys. And this officer is like singing this theme song from a megaphone on a police car with numbers on the back, right? All 3 generations of Black folks sat there, paused, ended up being furious, went through the whole gamut of emotion. And when you think about police reform, there's nothing about that says that that's easily reformed, right? Even with body cams, we have police officers acting boldly and with impunity that there won't be any action that's taken against them. However, as taxpayers, we bear the brunt of that, with some nearly $1 billion in the last 10 years in police settlements, which is outside of the police budget. So that's money that we carry when they raise taxes, create new fees, lower the threshold for red light camera ticket or speed tickets. So those are the sorts of things where if we look at what accountability looks like, it's accountability to make our community safer. Public safety is important to all of us. However, one of the key tenets of public safety is the community feeling like they trust the police. But if they don't trust the police, they don't talk to the police. If nobody talks to the police, crimes don't get solved. And with a murder rate, crime rate, solve rate of somewhere around 20%, where the national average is significantly higher than that, it speaks to really deeply rooted problems that need to be resolved as soon as possible.
Now, you mentioned that the story about the gathering of 3 generations and they drove by, and that's horrifying, frankly, to hear. I suppose it's not surprising, but it's horrifying. In terms of the new ordinance that's been pushed right now, what would that do to address an incident like that?
Sure. So the new ordinance creates two levels of accountability. The first is at the district level. So there are 22 police districts in Chicago. And what the ordinance will do is have 3 elected positions for each police district, which will allow for really deep conversations within the community that live outside the police department. The issue that I just spoke about, in theory, complainants would come through the district council representatives, be able to have a real conversation about that in a safe space that would allow for like there might be a deeper issue where there are a number of police officers who behave in this way, or maybe police officers shouldn't be in high schools. Like there's another conversation to have. That conversation can start at the district level and then bubble up to the commission. What the citywide commission does, it plays a role in selecting the police superintendent, which currently rests with the police board. One way that this will be different is that the police board is fully appointed by the mayor, where the community commission will be, there'll be a process that involves the community wholeheartedly that will identify candidates for the citywide oversight board. They'd also play a role in the COPA chief, selecting the COPA chief as well, and also writing policies for both and approving policies. So on one end, police departments make policies that are specific to the way that they believe that the community should be policed. On the flip side, there are places where, for example, the Adam Toledo murder, like there's this conversation lately around foot chase policy. The Chicago Police Department that's over 100 years old didn't have a foot chase policy in place at the time of that murder. It's a policy that deserves to be in place. There also should be policies around use of force. The Chicago Police Department training around use of force is outdated, and there needs to be another discussion around that. Those are just 2 places where the community at large will hopefully see a very quick transformation around how those things happen in the community.
Now, to clarify, are those 2 things that you just mentioned, are those in this ordinance that's been proposed?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is it enough to reform the existing structures, COPA and the police board, or do they need to be kind of done away with and a new structure put in? Is reform enough for them?
It could be. And I think if we look to the roots of the Police Accountability Task Force document, this is a decision that should be made by the citizens in Chicago. My personal opinions around all this are moot. It is, what do the citizens think should be done? And frankly, different communities should be policed differently. Like the way they police in Inglewood is different and probably should be different than the way they police in Mount Greenwood, but let's have a conversation about that with the residents. There are solutions that are community oriented that don't involve people with guns showing up. I heard a statistic yesterday that some 60% of police work has nothing to do with needing a gun. Then why are those officers showing up at those places where the people in crisis shouldn't have guns showing up at their homes? People who are loitering, people who have nonviolent problems shouldn't be using the police officers or having the police officers resolve those issues. And without having these larger community conversations about that, those things will continue to happen.
Now, how do you envision the representatives from the community being selected? You said you have candidates from each district. That would then be a 3-person panel, I guess, for each
let me do a better job of explaining it.
Sure.
So at the district level, those will be elected positions, just like a typical Board of Elections election, where the candidates must live within the geography of the police district. So that way you ensure that the representation is representative of the district. Having 3 people from across the district. If you look at the way the police districts are set up, they cover typically 3 to 4 communities or neighborhoods. And so we want to make sure that there's diverse representation from those communities, or at least an opportunity for that. One of those elected district council reps from each district will serve on a nominating committee to nominate people for the citywide commission. Per state law, the commission has to be appointed. And so what's different from, say, the police board, those folks are appointed as well. However, the candidates come from the mayor's office. For the community commission, there are a couple things I want to highlight. The first is, this won't be like any other commission that exists. The qualifications for commissioners are people who have a background in criminal justice reform, community organizing. We have a specific space for youth between the ages of 18 and 25 whose voices are never heard in these sorts of forums. And also for people with lived experience. And so if you've had some experience with police misconduct, police abuse, you have an opportunity to serve on a commission that helps to redirect those energies of the police department. Also with the commission, there'll be uh, this allowing for the community voice around selecting the police superintendent. If folks remember when Eddie Johnson was selected just a few short years ago, Mayor Rahm Emanuel used a loophole in order to appoint Eddie Johnson to that position. I understand that the mayor and the police chief should be aligned in their values. However, we believe that it's important for the community to play a role in that selection because the community has so much at stake when it comes to this. Not saying that we won't end up with the same people, but the commission will also hold these leaders accountable by setting annual goals and then coming back and revisiting those goals to make sure that the departments and the communities are aligned in their values and in their actions.
Now, I'll ask it this way. In terms of the authority that these elected people would have, each district would have this elected council. In terms of actual authority to make changes, what could they do? Would they have any authority to get a report of the officer driving past, playing the monkeys in front of and say, you know what, you're done, you're fired, get out? Or would they have to say, well, let's do a training, let's change our values? What would their authority be?
The authority rests more with the commission when you talk about citywide stuff. So the citywide commission has the ability to write policy, has the ability to ask COPA to perform investigations, right? So there will be some more, when we talk about oversight, it's about making sure that the tasks are completed, making sure that the goals are in alignment, right? And so there'll be a lot of work at that level that really makes sure that the issue that I spoke about before, right, has an opportunity to be resolved. So maybe it is an issue of training, or maybe it brings up the question of should police officers be in schools, or what kinds of police officers should be in schools, or maybe it changes the conversation about how police misconduct complaints are handled. There's a lot about that process that we feel needs to be reformed. For example, that anonymous complaints aren't allowed. However, if you file a complaint, your information is now shared with that officer, and there have been dozens of stories in the last few years about retaliation from police, or people just bother not to complain because they didn't want to have to share that information. What if there was an oversight structure or to report police misconduct that didn't leave those victims feeling vulnerable? That's the kind of change we want to make.
Now, it sounds like you said you had about 3/4 of the city council, several dozen faith, labor, and other organizations that are all behind this. So it hasn't been passed yet. Is it just it's going to be, or it's still a fight? What's the impetus for it not having been enacted?
Yeah, it's still a fight. So some perspective, our ordinance was finished in March. The March and April Public Safety Committee meetings were both canceled by Chairman Chris Taliaferro, who's the alderman of the 29th Ward. We, just this past Friday, had an opportunity to have our substitute ordinance introduced. And so this ordinance now lives in the Public Safety Committee. Per the chairman, there will be Public Safety Committee hearings and briefings that will happen over the next few weeks with a Public Safety Committee vote, and then an actual vote on the ordinance at the end of June, I believe June 23rd, City Council meeting.
Okay. Now, I heard that there was a new ordinance announced or proposed by Mayor Lightfoot. I don't have any details on it myself. I don't know if you've heard of it.
I have.
Okay.
Yeah, it was introduced today. Haven't seen much on it, but I think our chief concern is, even per her own words, when she was chair of the Police Accountability Task Force, that what this commission would look like in its power should be determined by the community. Her ordinance hasn't been vetted by the community. It wasn't created by the community. And so it's safe to say it will fall short. And then to add to that, the mayor was with us, the GAPA Coalition, a couple of years ago when she ran for office. She stood with us at a press conference and said she supported our proposal. And we worked with her office for a bit this past year and ran into some differences when it came to what we thought the powers of the commission would be. And so she walked away from the coalition last September, said she would present an ordinance, and we are seeing it for the first time today. So with this time that she's had in front of her to just present an ordinance and not have shared it with the community, says that it's probably not ready for prime time, and I would like to see folks support our ordinance just like the rest of City Council.
That sounds great. Well, I'm sure we could keep going for hours and hours, but we don't want to keep you too long. So I want to say thank you so much for coming out and talking to us. It's been very informative, and we hope we'll see you again soon. I'm going to pass it back over to Joseph now.
Thank you again for watching Illuminated with IVI Ipo. You've watched Jimmy Garfield and Joseph Michael Carr. If you're interested in becoming a member of Ivi Ipo, visit www.iviipo.org. If you want to renew your membership, you can follow that website link and renew your membership as well. Thank you again. Take care.